Hey everyone, Curse Deck Builder here, making our way to 10,000 decks assisted. And here we have Omnath, Locus of Creation, Landfall, and maybe Landfall tokens. This deck comes to us from Anonymous, who says, something feels off. It feels like it doesn't do much and there's some focus missing. Just not really sure what direction to go in. And they mentioned that they have a budget of $65 per card. Don't worry, I don't think we'll be hitting that. In fact, I think our general look at this deck will have maybe less includes and more transition with some cards you have in the side and a few other places. As always, I highly recommend you go and take a look at this deck list. The deck list will be in the video description below, and you should have it open while you listen to me or while you watch this, and take a look yourself. Our deck builder feels like something is off. Can you find out what it is? I'm not going to suggest you need to be a detective, but it's a little fun to be a detective with these decks. In fact, that's often what I'm doing. Our deck builder hasn't really specified because they don't know themselves what is missing here. So we're going to do a little bit of our own detective work to find out what that is. So first, as always, let's take a look at our commander and see why we are playing them. Omnath, Locus of Creation, is a 4 mana, 4 color, minus black, 4/4 elemental creature. When he enters the battlefield, or when they enter the battlefield, you draw a card, and then they have 3 different abilities depending on how many lands come into play. The first land that comes into play a turn gives you 4 life. The second land adds you 1 mana of each of Omnath's colors, and the third land entering play allows Omnath to do 4 damage to each opponent and to each of their planeswalkers. I guess a way to look at Omnath is that they are not a landfall enabler, they are a landfall payoff. And what's interesting about this is obviously there's a bit of synergy with the number 4 here across the abilities, even though it's 3 lands coming to play, which is a little funny. Omnath has a main ability we like to look at, which is the second ability. When you play the second land, you're going to get 4 additional mana this turn, which I think is a very big boost. The fact that you can gain 4 life or with a lot of trouble deal 4 damage to each of your opponents is really secondary to that middle ability. I think you could easily theme Omnath as a 4-color life gain commander, but that feels a little suspect to me, so I'm not quite sure if I would suggest that. And you could also theme Omnath around getting 3 lands into play repeatedly so that you can deal 10% of your opponent's life totals at them, but that also does feel a little suspect. I'm going to suggest that one of the tensions that this deck has is that it's kind of lacking a direction, and a card like Omnath doesn't really provide a direction for this deck to go into. We can see it as a way to ramp 4, right? You have 4 mana to play Omnath. You play 2 more lands or a fetch land into the land it fetches, which puts you either at 5 or 6 mana, and then Omnath triggers and you go from 5 to 9 or 6 to 10 mana. That is a hefty ramp, but you can tell if we look down, we actually don't have that many cards at that mana cost. We kind of end up at 7. And if we go further down and we look at the mana curve itself, we can see that it also doesn't trail past 7. We actually finish the mana curve rather quickly, and in fact, it is interesting that the highest number of cards we have is at 3 mana. So, with that in mind, we're kind of in a strange place to use Omnath as our commander. Now, I'm going to continue the video as if we continue to use Omnath as the commander. I'm not a fan of telling anyone to just use a different commander, but I want to address it because I think it might be part of the reason the deck has this weird feeling. I want this to be in the mind of our deck builder because I think they might find something a little better for themselves if they experiment with commanders. Granted, there's not a lot of 4-color commanders available of these colors. Probably partners are your best bet. but still just something on your mind. What I do see within the deck is a lot of attention to obviously landfall, but specifically landfall that creates creatures. From Scoot Swarm to Emeria Angel, Perforos that benefits from creatures entering play, Nestling Dragon that makes eggs, Spore Mound that makes sapperlings. Down here, no, not that one. Our Rampaging Balos makes 4/4, Avenger of Zendikar makes 0/1s. I feel like I'm missing one. There was one that I saw that also made something else, but that's okay. So all of these Fedalar Retreat makes 2/2s, and I'm sure there's a few others that I haven't seen, but there seems to be a large kind of attention paid into creating tokens and creating creatures. And I'm going to suggest maybe that should be the direction you go into. I think definitely this is the most powerful direction that uses as many of your cards that you already have. And I'm going to say, frankly, it really does seem like the most fun direction because landfall decks can sometimes feel like mishmashes of different types of cards, especially with this many colors, where the goal just ends up playing lands and just kind of seeing what happens as you play them. It's almost like an attraction deck, as we looked at early on in the channel's life, where attractions are just a bunch of random draws that randomly trigger to do random abilities. And landfall decks can end up feeling that way, where you're putting out a bunch of landfall cards, and they will just have completely almost random effects compared to each other. Looking at Ruin Crab versus Lotus Cobra versus Grazing Gladeheart, for example. There's no real synergy between these creatures outside of it really is helpful to keep playing lands, right? So let's try to pinpoint and focus on the deck that creates tokens and the deck that wants to go wide with tokens. We even have Divine Visitation here, which in my mind really does solidify the idea that we want to be making the most of a token-based strategy. So with that in mind, I'm going to go and point out some cards that I think don't really fit, and then we can look through your pretty extensive sideboard and anything else that I can think of with the hope that we can find a few more cards to put in. So from the top, Ruin Crab is a very strange inclusion outside of a mill deck. I think it's realistic that if you play Ruin Crab on the first turn, you could see upwards of 30, maybe 40 cards being milled throughout the game. That's not nothing. I think that's rather impressive. However, you have nothing else to supplement this mill, and at this amount, through one creature, if your opponents feel pressured, they'll just destroy the Ruin Crab. And if they don't, they might even just benefit from the Ruin Crab, right? Where if they're playing like a reanimation deck or a graveyard deck, that they'll just kind of okay with the fact you've milled half their deck because you've done kind of their job for them. With this in mind, I think it just kind of sticks out as a card you don't particularly want. It's just okay. I don't think you want to keep this, so this is an easy cut. The next one that comes to mind, as mentioned before, Grazing Gladeheart, just feels kind of strange. It is one of the 3 mana cards that you have a lot in your 3 mana slot, and all this does is gain you 2 life a turn. I think that's too little to really matter. You already have this ability on your commander, but twice as strong. Granted, you can only trigger this once a turn, whereas Grazing Gladeheart, you can trigger multiple times a turn. But otherwise, this is just a 2/2. You're not a life gain deck. This card doesn't really belong here. Looking further down, let's see. It was Green Sleeves that I forgot about. Green Sleeves makes 3/3 Green Badgers. I never quite knew that. I feel like I've seen this card a bunch of times, and I just stopped reading because Morrow Sorcerers aren't the kind of cards that I tend to like. But I should have kept reading because the fact that this creates a bunch of 3/3s is really, really good. So let's go down here to Geode Ranger. Geode Ranger stands out as a very strange card in this deck. It is a 6 mana creature, which is quite a bit of mana for what it does, and its ability that whenever you get a land, you goad a player. And I'm not going to lie, that's pretty impressive to goad an entire army of creatures if there is an army of creatures to goad. If you have 3 players and they each have 1 creature, this ability is considerably less impressive. Don't get me wrong, it can still be really good to goad one of your opponent's team, even if they only have 1 creature. Let's say I have a Dark Confidant and you decide to goad me in order to force me to attack, and hopefully one of your opponents or our opponents is going to block the Dark Confidant and you're going to get ahead. I get that, but the 2 problems are this. One, you're really not making the most of this ability, and you're opening it up for your opponents to politically motivate, like do some talks so that I can make a deal to keep my Dark Confidant around. It's actually quite simple to do so. In addition, I mean, it's just 1 creature. I might not be, I'm not that far put back by losing my Dark Confidant at that point in the game. Remember, you've had to get to 6 mana, so these cards have been around for a while, or, you know, alternatively, I have one really, really big creature that I don't particularly mind if you goad in the first place, right? I think this card gets considerably better when it forces you to attack the player that goads you, like in a one-on-one game. But I think this is straight into Commander products, so that wasn't their intention at all, and it catches me a little off guard. I guess the way I would sum it up is much like the Grazing Gladeheart. This card belongs in a dedicated goad shell, much like Grazing Gladeheart belongs in a dedicated life gain shell. Having 1 card that goads feels a little off, and therefore I'm a little picky on it, and I think you can do a lot better. Now, a lot of your higher mana cards do a lot of things, and I think generally most of them are very, very good, so I don't want to be too picky. Kodama of the East Tree is just a good card. I have no problem with you playing it, so absolutely, you have my blessing. Morag as well works well with a token army. Rampaging Balos, Avenger of Zendikar create tokens. Omnath creates tokens. And Emiria Shepherd is the only one that stands out as being a little tricky because half of her ability requires for planes specifically to enter the battlefield, which is a bit tougher than any land. So that's something worth considering. And if you were going to cut one of your 7 drops, this would be the one I would suggest because it's just a little weaker than the rest. I'm also realizing Zendikar's Royal also creates 2/2s. So I think there's definitely a sense of this deck was always meant to be a tokens deck. All right, let's look through a few other piles. Planar Disruption feels a little weak here just in comparison to other options that you would have. For example, Path to Exile is just a lot better for taking out creatures, or Beast Within is just better at generally just taking out everything, which I realize isn't on there, so I will suggest that, but just a little bit of a weird card. Beastmaster's Ascension was originally on my list of cards I didn't like, but now that we're going into the token theme, I do like it, so that's fine. Colossal Majesty, however, works inversely to cards like Beastmaster's Ascension, where it gets weaker and weaker the more of a token strategy you have. Don't get me wrong, with certain card setup, you can guarantee that your tokens come in as 4/4s or bigger, and that is really, really strong with Colossal Majesty. I still think it's too much. I think it is a card that half the time won't really do anything, and with that in mind, I don't particularly like it. Fervor, likewise, feels like a bit too much mana for what it does. We can get this ability at 1 green with Concording Crossroads, or for 2 colorless with Crashing Drawbridge is the card. So once again, not really where I want to be. Shared Animosity, also kind of strange, but as long as you're going tokens, I think it's perfectly fine. Otherwise, it's a card that feels really rather strange when you don't have the right board state in mind. All right, coming back here, looking down, a lot of these are very, very strong instant spells. Broken Wings should be, my goodness, it just left my brain. Beast Within. It should be Beast Within. Destroy target permanent, make a 3/3. Much cleaner. And then if you want, Generous Gift is the next one you should play. as it is just the same card, but in a different color. And since you're in both those colors, I think you'd be pretty happy to play both of those spells. This is just a fantastic card that honestly should always see play, if not for the humor alone. Ghostly Flicker and Boris. Okay, so Broker's Charm feels really strange here. I don't think it does anything you particularly want. I like the fact that it draws you 2 cards, but this is really, really mana specific to do so. And so I think this is a pretty easy cut. Your mana is already really, really tight, so I'm a bit unsure why you would go and play cards that make your mana base even tighter. So I would take that out. Likewise, Ghostly Flicker feels out of place here, as it is the type of card that wants to work with enter the battlefield effects. And your deck actually has, oh, lands. Ha! That's what I get for not finishing reading the card. I was just thinking, I was like, I know it's artifacts and creatures. I wonder if it's lands as well. Okay, I think that's really cute. I don't know how good it is, but I do think it's really cute that we get to flicker 2 lands into play. I don't love it, but you know, who am I to judge? I think this is definitely a card that I have not thought about in landfall decks, and I think maybe is worth considering. 2 whole triggers, depending on the creature, makes a really, really big difference. And with cards like Lotus Cobra, which pays for 2 of the 3 mana, technically, I think that's pretty cool. So yeah, I take that back. Great card. Love it. Well done. Looking at sorceries, sorcery seems pretty fine. Scapeshift stands out as a bit of a odd inclusion. I see where you're going for, but you need so many cards in play for Scapeshift to be good, right? You need at least 2 token producers because you're not going to feel particularly good if there's just one. You then need a haste enabler with Concordant Crossroads, which is what I'm suggesting, or Fervor, or Fires of Yamavaya. And then even then, you're going to make a medium-sized army, so you need something like Beastmaster's Ascension and or Divine Visitation to grow those creatures into angels or +5/+5. That seems like a lot to do what you want to do. It just seems like a lot. I think it's fine, but I think I would be a little hesitant about including this card, especially a 4 mana that matches your command. And then Wrath of God is great. All right. So looking at this and looking at your sideboard, which now that I'm looking through it, I don't really see anything I feel like we're missing. I think we're going to do a quick search here. We're going to write create landfall. And we're going to put in commander colors everything but black. And we're going to see what are we missing here. We don't want anything we have to pay mana in order to use it. So we want to be a little careful. So Architect says for every 6, that's 6 or 7. One thing I don't really like about this symbol is I always get confused. It's 8. My goodness, it's 8. Okay, that's too much. You need 8 land drops to get a 6/6? Absolutely not. Don't worry about that. Togo Goblin Weaponsmith is interesting as an option, though it doesn't create creatures. It does create rocks, and those rocks are rather funny. Uh, I don't think you really have a means to use these artifacts, but it is really, really cute and funny, and so something to just consider. Retreat to Emeria makes a 1/1 core ally every time you play a land, but I do really like the fact that it pumps across the board. So much like Feladar's, which is right here, I think, Feladar Retreat, this works as like kind of a worse version of that, which is still pretty good, mind you. I'll leave that for you to decide. If we run out of really good creature enabling landfall making tokens cards, I think Retreat to Emeria is just fine as another copy. So let's see the ones that we were missing. I think there's 2 here. Did you have Primeval Bounty? Doesn't seem like you did. 6 mana. Whenever you play a land, you gain 3 land. I see. It doesn't work that way. So Phylath is the last one that's really good. When Phylath enters play, you create a 0/1 for each basic land you control. And then when you play a land, you grow those plants. I think that's fine. I think it's just another token enabler that you can get away with. So these ones for sure. And then if we go back and see, I wonder if this has been errata at all. Whenever a land enters play. This is something that is coming to mind. So out of these three, okay, this is only from Exile. Don't mind you. Sorry, I had to reread these cards because I've actually never quite seen them. So Hazaron, which is my belief is the new version of the old Hazazon. Sorry, not Hazaron. Hazazon, Shaper of Sand, is every single time a desert enters the battlefield. My goodness, none of these cards. They won't let you just create 1/1s. Heartbreaking. Then I guess Cemetery Protector, but then the card type that has to be shared would probably be the land type, and that's going to be really, really specific. So I guess you kind of you found all of the cards that creatures put creatures into play by playing lands, but I think you have the right amount, and I think this is fine. I'm trying to think of anything else that's generally missing besides like removal. I guess card draw is something else you can improve on, but I see that you're considering Mystic Remora on the side, and you can put that into the main and start there. Then I guess the first thing I would go to is token doublers, where we're going to start looking at these cards and we're going to look for any card that allows us to have double tokens instead of one. And I think the best bet for this is EDH Rec. And we're going to look themes. We're going to find token, which is where exactly? There they are, token index. And we're going to look at our top cards like Mondrak, Ginny Fey, and I think we don't have black, so high synergies. I was just looking for our mana doublers. So Mondrak, Anointed Procession, Second Harvest, Rite of Replication could work. I just don't know all the token doublers by name, which I'm a little surprised about. And I can't search them correctly, it seems, on Scryfall, which I'm also surprised about. So we will look at enchantments here to see if there's any that we've missed. Intangible Virtue is just close to playable here that I would actually consider. Parallel Lives is one that I missed. That's one that can definitely be played here. And Tribute of the World Tree is definitely something that can be played in place of, where are you? Colossal Magistry, where the mana cost is really strict. I'm sorry, there's a dog barking outside, so I'm just gonna close this. It's got a high mana cost, like a very intensive mana cost, but it does grow your tokens as they come into play, which I think is worthwhile. And then I guess if you wanted Cathar's Crusade is another token enabler that this deck would really, really enjoy, but that's going to be up to you. Cathar's Crusade can be really, really good here because with one land, you could be generating, 2 to 3 tokens. And that's kind of the level that Cathar's Crusade starts getting really good at. And so I can see that being very strong here. Finally, something that I guess took me a while to kind of notice, and maybe this is the problem. We don't have that many abilities to actually put lands into play outside of doing it fairly. So I guess where I'm going to end this with suggestions is to play land, library, battlefield. And I think we're going to look 3 mana or less at all of our options of our cards that are going to put lands into play. I should have pressed the wrong green here. Yes, I did. Okay. This should make it a little better. So let's go to mana value. So cards like, let's see, Emergent Sequence, Farseek, Gatekeeper front. Oh, that goes into your hand. I always forget that. Where are our good ones? Sakura Tribe Elder is playable to get a land into play immediately. We could be playing so Farseek, 3 visits, Rampant Growth, Explore. I'm surprised that I can't find them. Scryfall is being very, very rude to me. But 3 visits is one of them. Any card like this that's just going to put a land into play, I think you use a few more of them because now each of these cards represent getting a bunch of creatures into play, which I think is going to be considerably better. Ooh, this has been kind of a messy deck, so I apologize. I apologize, sorry. I think, yeah, it's a little tricky to work on this deck because its identity is kind of all over the place. So I've made a suggestion here of what direction I'd like it to be in, but it's hard to suggest cards without completely revamping the deck. I think you're already playing almost every playable token generator from in these colors, and I think if you just lean into that direction a little better, cut a few of the cards that don't really belong, like Ruin Crab and Broker's Charm, and put in some cards that are just maybe a bit stronger versions of the cards that you're already playing, such as taking out Fervor and putting in Concordant Crossroads as a 1-mana haste enabler. I think you'll find the deck will start moving a little smoother, but I kind of want to end this with the thought that I had at the beginning. Omnath is kind of a tricky commander to build around. I play a format where I play Modern, right? And Omnath is very, very strong there because Omnath functions as support for a deck that uses all of its abilities really well. The life gain is really good because they're constantly paying mana to fetch, and so it offsets the life loss that the deck is naturally going through. And the mana is particularly strong because it can use to be used on the really strong cards like Fury, Solitude, other strong cards like that that need that large amount of mana to work. But the thing that's kind of the secret good thing of Omnath that you can't really have in Commander is that in Modern Omnath is used because you can pitch Omnath to all of the evoke elementals in the deck, which generally are Solitude and Fury for sure, Endurance for sure, and then even sometimes Subtlety, which is all 4 of the colors. And that's kind of like a hidden power of Omnath that you can't take advantage of in Commander. So, though I do really like the direction this deck is going into, I think it's worth considering the limits of that direction. And something else to consider, I think, is that when we look down, when we look at this deck, and we look at the token production suite, we can easily notice that they're not blue. So now I'm going to do the thing that I said I wouldn't do, and I'm going to suggest. Am I just not good at remembering names? How is Ginny Fey spelled? I'm going to suggest a commander that isn't the one you're playing. If you want a token strategy and to make the most of it, I think there we go. Ginny Fey, Jetmir II is a particularly strong commander for a strategy like this. It allows you to turn all your token producers, especially the ones that produce small tokens like plants or 1/1 birds, it turns them into either 2/2 dogs or 3/1, oh, I guess 2/2 cats with haste or 3/1 dogs with vigilance, both of which are particularly good power-ups, especially the haste feature on the cats, which enable you to immediately win. It also says any kind of token and not necessarily a creature token. And so things like Tireless Tracker and the other one, Tireless Provisioner. I think you're playing the Provisioner and not the Tracker. Let's see. Yeah, you're playing Tireless Provisioner, but Tireless Tracker as well. The tokens they make that aren't creatures become creatures, and you can start establishing a board that way. That would be my suggestion as a whole. Like if you were to come and shake me down and say, "Curse Deck Builder, I don't like this deck. Can you make it? Can you make it good? Like you can change anything?" I would say scrap Omnath, play Ginny Fey, keep the creature strategy, the Landfall creature token strategy, and see how far that takes you. But if you're looking at this deck and you want to keep Omnath and you want to fix it up, I have suggested creature tokens. You don't have to go in that direction, but you do have to pick a direction to go into. This deck is just kind of struggling because it doesn't know what it wants to be. And I think you also kind of know that, judging by the message you gave me. So take your time, maybe put the deck on ice for a while, give it some time to think and come back to it. But when you have the ability, pick a theme for it, pick a direction. I think you'll be a lot happier. And when you do so, then we can revisit this deck and see how we can aid it to be stronger in the direction you pick. I hope this deck assist video was helpful to you. I think I kind of rambled a lot this one. I'm sorry about that. I think I need a little more tea. But if and when you're ready to send me the draft of the next draft of this deck or any deck, there is a link in the video description below. You can fill out the form, you can send it my way, and I will take a look at your deck. And if you want to skip the lineup to ensure that your deck is the next one I look at, there's a link to that in the video description as well. And as always, if you'd like to like, comment, subscribe, do the whole YouTube thing, I would be incredibly grateful. It is great for the channel, and it is very, very helpful. All right. Thank you for the deck, and good luck.